Good morning. Welcome to the session for Storage Gateway. I'm sure this is one of the first sessions many of you guys are attending, so welcome to reInvent. My name is Asa Callaway. I'm the General Manager for Storage Gateway, Data Sync, and Transfer for SFTP. And I'm joined here with my co-presenters today, John Kennedy, who is the Principal Product Manager for Storage Gateway, and Ana Gonzalez, who is the Director of Platform Infrastructure at FINRA. When I talk to customers, oftentimes I hear common problems related to on-prem storage infrastructure. Customers often run out of infrastructure for managing backups on-prem, or they have aging NAS infrastructure that they want to replace, but they still need applications on-prem, or in some cases just share the data that's already in the cloud. If any of these problems resonate with you guys, you're in the right session. Today, we are going to talk about the Storage Gateway. I'll give a very quick summary for those of you that may not be familiar with Gateway, just a quick recap on Gateway. For those of you who have been users of Storage Gateway, we have a whole set of interesting releases we've done over the last year, so I'm excited to tell you about that. We'll focus this presentation into two types of deep dive today. One is go into use cases and talk about some of the features and how they help solve these use cases. And then last week at Storage Day, we announced a few new features, including high availability and advanced monitoring. And John will go into a deep dive of those features. And then Anna will tell us about their journey at FINRA on how they used Storage Gateway to evolve some of their on-prem infrastructure. There's three types of use cases that I commonly hear customers use the gateway for. And this is going to be a theme we'll talk about a few times during this presentation. But there are customers that are just starting to move to the cloud and often use backup as a first workload to migrate to the cloud. Then there are customers that are in the process of migration, and they're looking to eliminate their aging on-prem infrastructure, but they still need some storage on-prem. That's the second use case where they want to shift on-prem storage to cloud-backed storage. And then the third scenario is where customers have data that's already in the cloud, but they want to provide access to that from multiple locations. And that's the third use case for Gateway. And so essentially customers in different stages of their cloud adoption journey can still take advantage of Storage Gateway, whether they are just moving to the cloud, they're migrating, or they've already moved some of their infrastructure to the cloud. Over the last several years, we've had accelerated adoption of the gateway. We have tens of thousands of customers using the gateway, managing hundreds of petabytes of storage in the cloud, and uploading more than petabyte of data every day. One of the anecdotes we hear from customers is for every terabyte of cache that they provision on-prem, they're accessing 20, 30 terabytes of that data from cloud. So it essentially helps customers eliminate a large part of their on-prem storage infrastructure by accessing unlimited storage in the cloud. And the cache in the gateway allows customers to have that efficiency in their on-prem storage. Thank you. Several of you guys use the gateway today, so appreciate all the feedback you've given us over the years and helped improve the service. Just a quick recap for those of you that may not be familiar with Storage Gateway. The gateway provides unlimited access to AWS storage for on-prem applications. You deploy the gateway on-prem. It's a virtual or a hardware appliance. The gateway provides standard file block and tape interfaces, so all standard storage interfaces on-prem, so applications connect to it like any other storage service. It provides a cache that enables low latency access to frequently used data from on-prem. That data that's written to the gateway then gets moved to AWS storage, and the gateway optimizes the data as it's being sent to the cloud, so it minimizes the network bandwidth and also buffers from variations in network connectivity. And once the data lands into AWS, it saves it in multiple storage services, S3 and all storage classes. The volume data can be stored in, and accessible from block storage, as well as integrated with other AWS services such as AWS Backup. And one of the things that I often find interesting when I talk to customers about the gateway is that even if it's deployed on-prem, it gets managed like any other AWS service. So you can encrypt data using KMS, provide authentication using IAM, monitor using Cloudwatch, CloudTrail, et cetera. So it's an AWS service even if it's deployed on-prem. We offer 3 types of gateways. The file gateway provides a file interface to objects in S3. So it provides an NFS and SMB protocol access on-prem. There is a one-to-one mapping between files and objects. And these objects get written as S3 objects that are available in native form. So once the data arrives in AWS, you have access to that same data through the S3 API. So it provides multi-protocol access, both from on-prem and in the cloud. It also provides SMB ACLs and permissions, so you can manage the data as if it was files on-prem, but then you get the benefit of it being objects in AWS. The volume gateway is our second type of gateway. It provides a block interface. So you can access this through standard iSCSI protocols. And the blocks that are written to the gateway get stored as blocks in AWS, managed within the storage gateway service. And you can then take snapshots of this data and make them available as EBS snapshots. And then once you have a snap, you can even convert it to an EBS volume. And earlier this year, we introduced the ability to manage these snapshots through AWS backup as well. The third type of gateway is the tape gateway. The tape gateway provides a virtual tape library interface on the gateway. So essentially, it's a seamless lift and shift of physical tapes to virtual tapes. You write to the tape gateway as if you were writing through your existing backup applications, but instead of physical tapes, the data is written as virtual tapes. And these tapes then get stored into a tape library in S3. When you eject the tape, you can archive it into Glacier or S3 Glacier Deep Archive, which mimics the process that you would typically follow for archiving your on-prem tapes. The tape gateway is compatible with most leading backup applications, so it provides a very simple lift and shift of existing tapes into AWS. And we have a deep dive tomorrow afternoon that goes specifically into the tape gateway and how it operates. So in the last 12 months, we've been busy. For file gateway, we've introduced features like S3 object locking, SMB ACLs, which was a very common ask from customers on being able to provide access controls on their SMB file shares. And we've also invested in performance increases, so both write performance to the gateway as well as read performance, directory read performance. We've increased that by 2 to 3 times over the last year. With volume gateway, back in January when we launched AWS Backup, we integrated volume gateway with AWS Backup. So all the snapshots that you take of your on-prem volumes can be managed through AWS Backup. You can control the retention, deletion schedules, et cetera. We also introduced the ability to attach and detach volumes from across different gateways, which is very useful when customers are migrating their on-prem infrastructure and they want to move volumes across different gateways. For tape gateway, as I mentioned earlier, we introduced support for Glacier Deep Archive. So you can now store your archives in both Glacier and Deep Archive. We also increased the size of tapes that can be supported from 2.5 to 5 terabytes, so it makes it easier to manage the gateway, fewer tapes to manage. And then just last week at Storage Day, we also announced a 3x increase in performance of the gateway when it's reading from the cache. So it makes it possible to read your archives and backups faster. From a regions perspective, the storage gateway is available in 20 commercial regions, including Beijing and GovCloud. Last year at reInvent, we introduced the Hardware Appliance, which allows the gateway to not only be used as a VM, but also as a hardware on-prem. And Anna is going to talk a little bit about how they use the hardware appliances. Earlier this year, we expanded the availability of the hardware appliance in Europe as well. And we increased the size of the total cache that's available on the hardware appliance, so you can store more of your local data on-prem. We are quite excited to introduce a set of enterprise class features which we announced last week on November 20th. And John is going to go into a lot more detail on that. But we did introduce our first high availability configuration, which will be available on VMware. It was one of the most common asks from customers over the years, so super excited to be able to talk about that today. And then the second feature that was again a common ask was around getting more visibility into how the gateway operates. So today, obviously, we have a lot of insights into the gateway cache operation, et cetera. But you had always told us that don't operate it as a black box. Tell us what's happening in the gateway so we can better manage the resources and better tune the gateway. So we have introduced a whole set of embedded Cloudwatch graphs that you can now use to better monitor and manage your gateway. So we'll be talking about that as well. A reInvent special is, we introduced the Hardware Appliance in partnership with Dell. So we are announcing a 22% reduction in the cost for the Hardware Appliance for the next few weeks. And along with that, you can also get credits for the data transfer that happens through the gateway. And the appliance can be ordered from Amazon.com, and it gets delivered through Amazon Prime. So check that out for additional details there. So let me switch gears into the use cases for the gateway. As I mentioned earlier, the gateway is used for 3 use cases. So I'm going to go into each of these use cases in a little bit of detail and highlight the key features that are pretty unique to making that use case effective. Backup. So backup has been a common workload for the storage gateway ever since it was launched a few years ago, and we increasingly have customers use it to back up all kinds of on-prem data to the cloud. And all 3 types of gateways, file, volume, and tape, play a different role in solving the on-prem backup problem. So if you look at file gateway essentially offers a file share that customers can write data to. There is a number of applications, specifically databases, that typically don't involve a backup application. So customers typically have scripts or use the inherent capabilities within the database to back up that data and write it to a file system. So we have a number of customers that now use File Gateway to write those the file backups through the gateway, and the backups then move to the cloud. You can keep controls by applying controls like S3 object lock to meet your retention or compliance needs. Because the data is available as native objects, you can now do your restores in cloud. So we have a number of customers that either use EC2-based databases or even RDS and our native databases to restore that data in the cloud, which becomes a nice way for customers to start using Storage Gateway to back up to the cloud and eventually migrate those applications over to the cloud as well. And the cache obviously makes those frequently used backups accessible on-prem, so you have a low latency access to recent backups. The volume gateway also has a role in the backup use case. So you can back up your volumes through the gateway into the cloud. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use the AWS backup system to have a single pane of control to not only manage your in-cloud backups, but also volume backups, so you can schedule your retention policies, et cetera. Tape Gateway, as I also mentioned earlier, provides an easy lift and shift on-prem backups, tape backups to virtual backups in the tape. Analog Devices, for example, is a customer that's using Tape Gateway to move their virtual tapes to the cloud. They use EMC Networker as their backup applications. And they actually had a 12-month process to move from physical tapes to virtual tapes. For several months, they were doing parallel backups between on-prem archives to their off-site location, as well as backups in the cloud. They would rotate their recovery and restores alternatively between the cloud and on-prem to get comfort on how the backups were operating. And then a few months ago, they cut off their backups from on-prem completely to using the Tape Gateway. And through the process, they were able to at least achieve a 50% reduction in cost and saved a lot of their maintenance and got more reliability out of moving the data to AWS. Kellogg's uses the File Gateway to do backups of their databases, and they essentially were able to get almost a 90% reduction in their backup costs because now they write directly to the gateway and move that data into restores in cloud. Let's talk about the second use case. This use case relates to replacing on-prem storage infrastructure with cloud-backed infrastructure. So oftentimes I talk with customers who have a NAS that is close to end of life. They don't want to extend the NAS. They are in the process of moving to the cloud, but they still have applications on-prem that need file-based access. So the file gateway plays a role in this use case where essentially you can get rid of the on-prem NAS, or sometimes you can use your existing NAS for some applications that need yet another level of performance, but you can move some applications through the file gateway. And now with this, the data goes into AWS. You have unlimited access to that. I'm going to let Anna speak a lot to this because her use case is related to this particular scenario. Other customers, we have Cox Automotive who are doing a talk later today on how they were able to use data sync to move some of their on-prem storage to the cloud. And then for the remaining storage applications, they were able to use the file gateway as a way to as a way to get that file access. The third use case is about getting low latency access to data that is already in the cloud. So many customers have moved data either through Snowball or Data Sync or the CLI into AWS, and these could be media archives or geospatial data. So the data is in cloud, but they need to make that data available for on-prem applications. In other cases, the data is being processed in the cloud, so it could be a genomics pipeline or a media processing pipeline. But there is a need for distributed applications, maybe in branch offices or remote locations, to get access to that data in the cloud. And so in that case, we have customers deploying many gateways accessing that same data, the same S3 bucket, and they have access to data from multiple locations. We have features like cache refresh, which we talked about at reInvent last year, which allows you to programmatically refresh your cache so it stays consistent with the data that's in the cloud. So this becomes a data distribution use case. We have customers like CME Group who are in the financial industry. They run their analytic models in the cloud, but then their users in multiple locations on site basically access that data as if it was available locally. So this gives them, again, a path for migrating to the cloud and meeting the on-prem performance needs for their customers. So I'm going to switch gears now and hand it over to John, who will do a deep dive on the high availability features as well as monitoring features that we just launched.
Great. Thanks, Asa. So I'm going to talk to you about the features that we launched at Storage Day on the 20th of November. And these were features that you requested. We listened, and we built all year, and we were really excited to launch. So the thing specifically that you told us that you wanted to be able to run applications uninterrupted to meet internal SLAs. And this could be for a range of different reasons. It could be that you have instruments that are writing to a storage gateway that need 24/7 access to that gateway uninterrupted. It could be that there's media drives with users that need continuous access to those gateways. It could also be that you had workloads where you weren't going to have someone available to fix a workload if it was interrupted, and so you needed automatic recovery. So for all of these use cases, we built an integration with VMware HA that allows for high availability on the gateway. So this is a really powerful integration. I'm going to go into the details of it in a minute. The next thing you asked for was visibility into the gateway. And this is for a number of reasons. You want to optimize the VM resources that you're deploying on-premise. You want to be able to see what's happening with the gateway, how your users are using the gateway, the usage that you're getting. And so what we've done is we provided an integration with Cloudwatch that's directly visible within the gateway console. So you can go into your gateway console, and I'll show you this in a minute, and see all of those metrics across usage and performance to guide your usage of the gateway, your deployment of the gateway. You also asked for more options for maintenance windows, so you could align those to your IT schedules, and we have delivered additional options. So we'll talk about that in a second as well. But first, let's talk about high availability. So what is it? Well, you were always able to deploy Storage Gateway onto VMware, with VMware HA. But what we've done now is we've built a range of health checks application level health checks that check on the NFS and SMB availability for a file gateway, iSCSI availability for volume and tape gateways, various configurations. And what that means is that for any of those application level problems, VMware can recognize that they're happening with those health checks and actually restart the gateway. We've also brought down the initialization time of the gateway, so that restart is really fast. And what that means, and in fact, we've heard from customers that this is, for large workloads has been under 24 seconds, that means that the application isn't interrupted. It may pause as the gateway restarts, but then it'll continue running, under those average timeout times. We've put the target as 60 seconds, but we're seeing a lot lower than that in most cases. So what does this mean? Well, it means you can run those workloads that need to be uninterrupted, with VMware HA with shared storage. It means that you've got one system that protects you against hardware interruptions, hypervisor interruptions, and network interruptions. It's all within VMware HA. You can manage that with all of your other applications you're managing with VMware HA in the same spot in the VMware console. And as I said, Gateway is going to automatically recover within 60 seconds from any interruption. So that's a really great feature from our customers, and we were able to determine this is the right direction to go in for our customers across a range of many meetings we had with customers, understanding their environments, and so this really delivers on that promise. So to talk about how it works at a software level, as I said before, if there's if there's a problem that's found with the endpoint, so the NFS endpoint, for instance, isn't able to be accessed, it's going to restart the gateway, probably on the same host with that same shared storage, so you retain your cache. And that means that you're going to keep that low latency access to all of those files, and there's going to be no session interruption. It'll be on the same network address, so seamlessly the application will keep accessing the storage gateway. In the case where it's a hardware, hypervisor, or network error, it's going to probably switch over to a different host. Also does that seamlessly, connecting to the same shared storage. And so you've got, you still keep your local cache, same network address, all within VMware HA, and you can continue access to the storage gateway. And then for customers who deploy with a spanned cluster between their regular data center and their DR data center, that means that the applications that access storage gateway can continue that access in a disaster recovery situation, as they would in your regular data center. So let's talk about Cloudwatch integration. So this is something that we had, internally for a long time. This is how, we would look at gateways when there was a support ticket about a gateway. All of our support engineers would have access to these metrics and these events that would come out of a gateway, but now you do as well, and this is something you really asked for, and now we've made that really easy to see within the console. So real-time visibility of cache utilization, access patterns, throughput IO metrics, and also the kind of performance and cache metrics that allow you to understand what you need to deploy with your gateway on VMware. So let's look at what the dashboard looks like. So this is a typical dashboard you'd see for a gateway. And you can see there's a range of different metrics available here. I'll talk about how you can integrate these with events and triggers in a minute, but what we're going to do now is just step through each part. So you can see we've got client traffic and cloud traffic, pretty easy to understand. The client traffic is the local traffic on the network, so applications and users accessing the gateway. You can see read bytes and write bytes, and this corresponds really well with cloud traffic. So you can see that first spike just under or just above 1124 for write bytes. You can see then those bytes are written up to the cloud in the cloud traffic. Really easy to understand that one. Then there's some cache metrics, and this is going, when you're diving a little deeper into the usage of your gateway, you can see cache percent dirty. See, this gateway obviously has a great network connection, is provisioned with the right resources, because immediately as data is going into the gateway, it's being uploaded to the cloud. So there's no dirty cache. And this is what you want to see with your gateway, is that flat line there. And you can see cache hit percent, so when it's actually going up to the cloud, and index, the index evictions and fetches, also another good indication of how your cache is being used. SMB sessions. So if you're using File Gateway and you've chosen to deploy an SMB share, you can actually see users connected to that SMB share. You can see which versions of SMB they're using. On this particular graph, you can see the usual usage is with v3, and then we get a little spike of v1. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the final, so here we go, the second final metric I'm going to talk about, so memory and CPU. So if your gateway's operating a workload, and it's performing pretty well, and then you change the workload on that gateway, you add a share, it's doing something very different. What you might see here is a change in the memory usage and the CPU usage. And as your memory usage approaches, so you can see here, mem used bytes versus total bytes. As the used approaches the total, you know that you need to allocate more memory to the gateway. Obviously, you can set triggers and thresholds on this so you can be alerted when this needs to happen. Similar with the CPU usage. Health notification count. Usually this is going to be at 0 as well, but if there is an HA event, or there is a configuration error, this is where it'll pop up. You'll see it happen on this graph, and obviously if you see that spiking at all, you know there's something you need to do with your gateway. So this starts to tell a whole picture about how a gateway is operating. You can see, from the client traffic, there's been writes. You can look at the cache hit percentage. You can see when reads need to be pulled from the cloud. You can see how easily they correspond in this picture and really give you a full picture of the gateway. So from those events and those metrics, you can go further with the integration. So all those events and metrics go into Cloudwatch, which means you can build triggers and thresholds. So as your CPU usage comes up, nearly to 100%, you might set the threshold at 95% or something like this. You could trigger SNS. You could send a message to an administrator. You could also, have your memory do the same thing as you approach your total memory usage. Also, if there's a health notification, you could send a message. You can also utilize AWS Lambda. So on one of those events or thresholds, you can trigger an action. And this can be really useful for a gateway if you need to do something such as a refresh cache or an upload notification. Obviously, there's a lot of further processing that you can do on these actions with AWS Lambda that you could already do, before this integration, and now you can do even more. So finally, additional maintenance window options. We've added the option for day of the month across all gateways. So we've had day of the week, now we've got day of the month. There are more schedules coming, but this really fills a need for customers that have workloads where they need to fit in with an existing maintenance schedule. Day of the month was a very common one we've heard from customers, so we've integrated that as well. And now I'm going to hand over to Anna. Here you go.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ana Gonzalez, and I'm a Director of Platform Engineering at FINRA. I'll be sharing with you how we leverage Storage Gateway in an environment, in particular the File Gateway. But first, a little bit of who we are and what we do. For those who don't know us, FINRA, which stands for Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. We are an independent, non-governmental regulator. Our main mission is to ensure market integrity, and we are dedicated to investor protection. FINRA regulates all security firms and brokers doing business with the public in the US. And we do so by monitoring trading activity on all the US stock markets. And to do this on a daily basis, we have to process up to 135 billion market events. We spin up to 50,000 compute nodes, and we manage 40 terabytes of storage. So almost 6 years ago, and in order to enhance our capabilities, FINRA decided to move the workloads into the cloud. So as we were going through this journey, obviously, which had a big impact on our data centers, our footprints were reducing as we were moving workloads into the cloud. And one of the main challenges that we were facing is how to maintain and replace aging infrastructure without interruption to service, and in particular without distracting teams that were focused on the cloud migration. So in order to take care of this challenge, we had to do some adjustments to certain practices that we had. The first one was we needed to align our text refresh cycles with the cloud migration. We didn't want to replace assets that were going to be vacated shortly after being replaced, or end up with assets in our data centers that were going to be underutilized because applications had migrated. So in many cases, we had to extend the refresh cycle of certain assets so that we ensured that when it came time to replace them, we were going to right-fit them. And we are constantly looking at our infrastructure, servers, and storage. In particular, those resources that are shared, so that we continue consolidating workloads and moving data so that we can further reduce our data center footprint. This led us into having to look into our service contracts. We look into third-party alternatives that are more flexible than managing those support contracts with your vendors. And obviously, we had to be very flexible and had contingency plans to accommodate for either delays or changes in the timeline. And as we move forward with being more familiar with AWS, obviously, we had another resource that we could leverage when looking into the replacement, C services or resources that we could leverage for on-prem applications. And this is how, beginning of this year, we started looking into the replacement of our NAS infrastructure. We have a total of 4 NAS filers that have reached the end of life. The last year, we had them, or actually this year, in third-party support. And we know that those services need to still be provided for on-prem applications for at least 2 more years. So we started looking into what to do with those filers. Obviously, the easy way is get something similar. But before we go there, sorry. This is how our environment looks. We have 2 data centers. The primary data center is where our workloads, production workloads run. Probably this looks very familiar to what you have. We have 2 filers, one in our DMC environment and one in our core environment. Between these 2, we have a total of probably 60 terabytes. We service 4 applications. We don't replicate fully the shares. We just replicate directories within the shares so that those are replicated to the secondary data center, which is our DR. Secondary data center, similar setup. Here we service QC workloads and also provide disaster recovery services. In these shares, we had QC and DR data, you might call it commingled, because we were just migrating portions of the production data. The DR data is presented in read-only to the clients, and its full access is provided only in the case of a DR event, whether it's real, which we haven't had a chance to test, or if it's a test. So again, as we were looking into this replacement, we started looking into Storage Gateway, the file gateway in particular. So the first thing that we did is we acquired an appliance, a hardware appliance, brought it on premises, and conducted a series of tests with our main application. From simple tests, just to test functionality, to all the way performance tests, to make sure that the performance that the devices was going to provide us was similar to what we already have. Obviously, the tests were positive. and then we decided to move forward with this replacement. We acquired a total of 11 storage gateways, and these were going to house the shares that we have. And the project right now is in progress. We need to complete it before the end of the year. Hopefully, this weekend is when, this coming weekend is when we finish the migration. So basically, this is how our environment looks now in production. We installed a total of 7 storage gateways. 2 of these we designated as standby redundant to provide redundancy. They're going to be there with all the access required in case there's a problem with any of the other storage gateways. So we have the data, we have provisioned S3 buckets. The storage gateways have access to this data, and the standby will have all the firewalls, all the access required to access the shares in any of these S3 buckets. In our secondary data center, similar setup. Here we have less storage gateways, and we segregated QC and DR workloads. So one storage gateway is going to be servicing or providing access to the QC data, and the DR storage gateways are going to be providing access to the production data. Similar to what we already had been doing is the data is provided in the production data is provided in read-only, and it's only activated in case of a DR event is declared. And another slight difference here is in our primary data center, each storage gateway has access to or provides access to one share. Here, one storage gateway is providing access to multiple shares. And the main reason that we did that is to minimize the footprint on one hand, and the other one is data access in QC is much lower than it is in production. And just one thing that I forgot to mention. So probably you have done this a few times. Moving the data to the new location, it was simply of configuring the storage gateways, defining the shares, and once you have that, you can start copying the data. So we initiate that ahead of time. Once the initial sync is completed, we can schedule a maintenance window with the application just to do the shift from one location to the other one. And once we do that, the application is brought up. They don't see any difference in the environment. So along this way, some of the things that we learned, as indicated earlier, we decided on going with the hardware appliances. And since we are already a Dell customer, we did the purchase directly with Dell. So we just had to make sure that they knew what was the purpose of the servers that we were purchasing, to ensure that they had the right configs and that the software that is needed was going to be preloaded. One thing on which we had to invest a little bit of time was reviewing firewall requirements with our security team to make sure that we were in compliance, and also with the network team to review the setup required to have access to the cloud resources, S3 in particular. So we did this. It was kind of a lengthy process during a POC, so when we were ready to move into our implementation, all those things were already taken care of. Obviously, since we were getting hardware appliance, we needed to allocate for time for racking, stacking, and physically configure the devices. One thing that we found very helpful, it was, even though we had those filers for a while, it was to document the environment. the shares that we use, the clients that access it, the VLANs that those clients are sitting. This was very helpful when configuring the storage gateways, and also helped us to clean up data a little bit before we moved to the new location. So I'm guessing that a lot of you face the same problem when you have a shared storage that everybody has access, and they just put everything there, and they never go back and clean up. So we took advantage of the migration to do that. Once you do all these things, management of the storage gateways is very, very simple. Very simple to define in the console, and very simple to configure. It takes minutes. The same thing with the shares. Once you define the gateway, you define the share, and you have all the clients, all the information. In minutes, you have a share that you can present to a client. So the benefits that we have obtained from this. First of all, cost savings. The capital investment in the storage gateways was a fraction of what we would have invested in getting a replacement of what we had, equivalent. With the added feature that now we have access to unlimited storage in the cloud. We haven't told our customers that, because if we do, they will manage to use it all in no time. Since we're leveraging commodity hardware, also our operating expenses have gone down. Support and maintenance is much, much lower. We have eliminated the overhead of managing the storage devices, and in particular, replacing the constant replacement of disks. Right now, all it's gone. And we can manage this environment as opposed to multiple teams. One team can take care of the whole environment. As indicated earlier, the implementation is practically done without disruption. You can do all the work ahead of time and just schedule the small maintenance window to do the transfer. We also achieve something that we had been trying to do for a while, which was isolate our workloads, QC and DR. Now they're very well defined. They're like easily managed for the different purposes. And we have enhanced our data reliability and availability. Also, this has opened opportunities for us in the future. Right now, we're conducting another proof of concept. This time, we're going with storage gateway, also file gateway, but on VMware. And this is for an application that once they complete their migration, they will still need a component on premises that is going to be accessing data that is going to be produced in the cloud. So that's something that we are currently doing, conducting a POC to make sure that it's going to be something that is going to work for them. In addition, we have an environment, a platform on which we can easily provide to our customers when there's a need to transfer data to or from the cloud. If they have to do this, if they have the data in the cloud, it's just a matter of pointing to the particular S3 bucket that they have the data, and they can see it on-prem. Or if they have data on-prem and they need to send it to the cloud, it's going to be very easily done. This is for sure something that we would have loved having 6 years ago. It would have facilitated the transfer of data that we were doing at that time in a very big way. We ended up creating like a Frankenstein as a solution to be able to move this data to the cloud. We're also looking into other capabilities that the storage gateway provides, in particular the volume gateway. And this is something that we see a lot of potential for workloads that we will require block storage, and they still need an on-prem premise. So this is something that we still need to evaluate, and this is something that we are going to consider when looking into our SAN infrastructure for replacement. So that, in a nutshell, is our journey on Storage Gateway. I'm hoping that this was of use and it was helpful for you. Thank you very much.